As we begin the last chapter of the Mishnah Shabbat, I just want to remind us about a pasuk that we learned halfway through the Masechet about dealing with animals. It's from Shemot. Sheshet Yamim Taseh Masecha. 6 days you shall do your work. Uvayom Hashvi'iti Shbot, and on the seventh day you rest. Lema'an Yanuach Shorcha v'chamorecha, in order that your ox and your donkey shall rest. Ve'inafesh ben amatcha v'hager, and that the son of your slave and the stranger should rest too. Somehow we're responsible, as well as for our own rest on Shabbat, for the rest of our animals and our servants. And the Mishnah then begins in the 24th chapter. Mish hechshich baderech, someone who was on the road when it became dark. We're using the same expression, hechshich, that we used when we referred to someone hanging around until it got dark at the end of Shabbat in order to perform a mitzvah as soon as Shabbat went out. Mish hechshich baderech, someone who was on the road when it became dark. But now this is when Shabbat is coming in. So he's on the road, he's away from civilization, from a town, he's got all his stuff with him. Shabbat is coming in. We began the Masechet by talking about carrying and the problems of carrying on Shabbat, and now we're going to end it with this question: how is he going to avoid carrying his stuff on Shabbat as Shabbat is coming in? Getting dark and he's on the road. And the Mishnah says, "Noten kisol nochri." He gives his purse to a non-Jew. Ve'im ein imo nochri municho al chamor. If there's no non-Jew with him, he puts it on a donkey. We're not going to make our donkey work on Shabbat, so we prefer, in principle, to give the purse to a non-Jew than to a donkey. But if we need to do that, the commentators explain, we will give the purse to the donkey, we'll put it on a donkey before Shabbat comes in. So at least we're not actually commencing the work of the donkey as Shabbat comes in. And the Rambam explains there that we permit someone to give his purse to a non-Jew because people are anxious about money. It's absolutely impossible to imagine. It's impossible that he'll throw his purse away. The lulezot hahatra, without this permission, he would actually carry it himself. So in order to make sure that he doesn't carry it himself, we permit him to give it to a non-Jew or to place it on the donkey. And then when he gets to town, he reaches the outermost courtyard, and this is where his destination. He removes the objects which may be handled on Shabbat. So we're going to come back to questions of muktzah, which we've been developing over the last few chapters. For stuff which is muktzah on Shabbat, matir chavalim. He just unties the cords and the sacks fall off of their own accord. He just unties the cords and all the sacks fall off the donkey. What if they're valuable? So we're going to go back to the Rambam, this time, in fact, not on the commentary on the Mishnah, but in the Mishneh Torah. Maybe the sacks are large and they contain glass utensils and the like. Stuff that's delicate. We can't just throw that on the ground. Correct, Benachat. He unloads the sacks gently. So in other words, we do allow him to handle these objects. And then he goes on. Umikol makom, in any case, lo Yanichan Sham al Gavei Behema. He shouldn't leave them on the back of an animal, mishum tsar ba'alei chayot, because of the pain to the animal. So we are concerned with keeping Shabbat, but somehow the question of pain to an animal supersedes the question of a human keeping Shabbat. And this will be outlined in the next two Mishnayot, which together form the first part of the last chapter of Shabbat. We're going to untie bundles of sheaves in front of cattle. This is to feed the cattle, because they can't eat otherwise, even though these sheaves may be muktzah on Shabbat, or it may be work to untie them on Shabbat. And we're going to separate the bundles called kefin. Kefin seem to be bundles which are tied up tightly with 3 knots, and the animals just cannot get at the food unless we've untied the 3 knots. But not small ones. The zerin are a different kind of bundle. Jastrow seems to only describe them in antithesis to the ones which are tied up with 3 knots. But it seems as if the animals can get at these without untying, so we don't need to untie them. And again, along the same lines, Ein maraskin lo et hashachaveh lo et haruvin. We don't chop up unripe grain or carobs before cattle. We don't need to do this so they can eat. Bein dakal vein gasar, whether, well, literally small or fat. The Gemara talks about behemah daka, thin cattle, small cattle, to refer to goats or sheep, and behemah gasar, thick cattle, fat cattle, to refer to cows and oxen. Doesn't make any difference. We don't chop up this stuff before them. Although Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, the halacha is not going to go according to Rabbi Yehuda, as we know. But Rabbi Yehuda matir v'charuvin ladaka. Rabbi Yehuda permits it in the case of carobs, for behemah daka, for goats and sheep, for thin cattle. Clearly, he thinks that they can't eat these if they're not chopped. What if we need to feed, or we are tempted to feed animals for our own benefit rather than for their benefit? And the Mishnah is very clear here. Ein of sin et hagamal. We don't stuff a camel on Shabbat. They used to stuff food down camels' mouths in order to get them ready for a long trip out to the desert. So camels can go a long way without food, but we need to feed them up. So they used to stuff camels before these long journeys, and they used to cram them. This is velod or sin. We don't stuff a camel and we don't cram it. These are 2 different words for stuffing food into camels. Aval mal itin, but we do put it into the mouth. We put the food in its mouth. Mal itin is the same word that Esau uses when he's asking, Esav asks Yaakov for the soup. He says, Hal iteni na, mina adom hazeh. Hal iteni means to basically pour food into someone's mouth. So we do put food into its mouth. V'ein mamrim et agalim. We don't force feed calves. Interesting, they used to do that in the time of the Mishnah. We don't do that on Shabbat. Aval mal itin, using the same word, we do put food in their mouths. And we scatter food for chickens, and we put water into coarse brown to make it edible, but we don't need it. Lo govlim. And there are certain things that we don't need to do at all on Shabbat. We don't put water in front of bees. Bees can generally find their own water, even on Shabbat. A fly. We don't put the water in front of doves either. Same principle. They can find their own stuff on Shabbat. Aval. Not but we do put water in front of geese and chickens and Herodian doves, and these seem to be domesticated animals that can't find water on their own. And we do take care of domesticated animals on Shabbat. And going back to the principle of that the Rambam announced, which is an incredibly important principle running through many different halachot. Mishum tsar balei chayim, because of the pain to the animal. And the Talmud says, Sadiq Yodea Nefesh Bahamtor. Sadiq knows how his animal feels.